Hey everybody, it's Tim and Steve from Phantom History here in the Phantom History House Potion Room. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing well, and how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks everybody for watching Phantom History House Calls. All right, so hope everybody's doing well, and we are busy.
Yeah, I can't believe we're at the end of January already, and Valentine's Day is right around the corner. We're going to be in February before you know it. And one thing I'm looking forward to in February is we are going to Sir Henry's Haunted Trail again.
Absolutely. Can't wait to do that. They have a special Valentine's version, everybody. So if you're a fan or you've never been and you've always wanted to go, it's a great time. It's a little less crowded than it can be during Christmas time.
Yeah, we're finally going to have some good weather for it too. And remember, if you are tuning in to watch tonight, make sure you drop a hello in the comments. Ask us questions, because tonight we are going to talk about one of our favorite cities, Savannah, Georgia.
Absolutely. Before we do, really quick, tomorrow we have book club. So if you're happen to watch this live before a book club happens, we hope that you'll come join us. Information about that is on our website at phantomhistory.com.
Yeah, and it's 2 short stories by Stephen King, so there's still totally time to read both of them. They're in the Skeleton Crew anthology. We're reading The Raft and Mrs. Todd's Shortcut.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Anything else before we jump in?
I don't think so.
So we love doing traveling, going to beautiful, wonderful places, historic cities, especially. We love learning about the history, and that often leads us to the paranormal stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've said 100 times on this show and with our guests, tell them that whenever I travel, I love to take a ghost tour of the city. It's a great way to learn about the history as well as to kind of get that spooky thing that I like.
Absolutely. So it's really fun. And we did go to Savannah. Now, this trip was, when was it?
This was in the summer of 22.
Okay, so a couple years, almost 2 years ago. So we need to go back for sure. But we had such a wonderful time, and so we have some video clips and little interviews in historical things that Steve has to share. We're going to share some of those as we talk tonight.
Yeah, and I do the Phantom History podcast, and I love digging into the history behind some of these historic locations, and then actually being there is really cool, because I have this thing goes on in my head, like what was here 100 years ago, or whose grave am I looking at? It's really fascinating to me, and I've always loved doing that. So this was a really cool trip to be able to experience that.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to be in a place and think about the history and all the people and the events and things that have happened over time. And of course, that's wonderful here in the United States when you go over somewhere like Europe and there's like centuries and centuries, and then it's almost staggering all the amount of history that has been in these places. So it's been a lot of fun.
It has been. And almost every time we have a guest and we start talking about spooky stuff, they will ask, oh, have you ever been to New Orleans? Oh, have you ever been to Savannah? Those are the top 2 questions we always get when it comes to travel.
And sometimes St. Augustine, since we're in Florida, it gets mentioned.
Yeah. And Key West gets mentioned. But I think Savannah and New Orleans are the 2 big ones. And we can say, yes, we have been to both. I've been to New Orleans multiple times. And this trip that we're going to talk about tonight was actually my first time ever to Savannah. But you've been before. Oh,
absolutely, because I'm from Georgia. And so I've been to Savannah many times. But I always loved it. It's very historical. I always loved the pirate part of it. There's a famous restaurant, the Pirate House, where you can get seafood, and it was, it has a history of a pirate place where pirates hung out, and you can see that. So it's really, really cool vibe. By the way, if you're watching, please say hello. Hi, Kristen. I'm glad you guys are watching tonight. Thank you so much. We're talking about Savannah, Georgia, one of our favorite places. Yes. So we were there. We have some clips from our trip, and we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Well, what's so cool about Savannah is that, one, it's beautiful. It's set up. It has, like 22 separate squares, and it's a very walkable city, especially the historic area. But there's like historic markers everywhere. And we took a couple of ghost tours. We took a ghost tour of the city. We did a ghost tour of the Sorrel Weed House. Of course, I did my nerd out thing and did a bunch of research on all the places we visited.
Sure.
And one of the most popular places in Savannah, Georgia, is the cemetery that is just outside, actually right within the city, not too far from the waterfront. And we spent a little bit of time there, and we did some videos.
Absolutely. So we're going to show some videos with little clips of Steve talking about what was happening there. Which one would you like me to do? The one about the one that's just about cemeteries?
No, the Colonial Park Cemetery is the one we're going to start off. That's the most famous cemetery in Well, one of the most famous cemeteries in Savannah and the one that's closest to downtown. And these are brief clips. They're less than 2 minutes.
Okay, so let's watch a little bit of this and then we'll talk about it. If you have questions, please type them in.
Yeah.
In the heart of Savannah, Georgia is one of the oldest cemeteries in the United States. This is Colonial Park Cemetery, and it was founded in 1750 and was an active burial cemetery until 1853. And there's a lot of famous people here who are laid to rest, some who have been moved and are now placed under monuments in some of the many squares that are in Savannah. But what I found most interesting about this location is the wall behind me. We were told by a local tour guide that in the 1970s, when they were wanting to replenish and refurbish the cemetery, they found a lot of old tombstones and they didn't know where they belonged. So there are not really marked graves here. And when you walk through the park, you can actually see that it's pretty scattered. But if you look behind me, you can actually see that there are a ton of these old tombstones that are really well preserved, and they're actually attached to the wall so people can read what they have to say. So they date as far back as the, like I said, the 1750s, and the ones that are up here on the wall are mostly from the early 1800s. But it goes the entire length of the city block that this cemetery sits in. Let's take a walk down the wall and check out some of these.
All right, so we were talking about Savannah, Georgia. That was really, that's a beautiful cemetery, like big vistas of green grasses and trees and things. Of course, Savannah's all like that anyway.
And amazing camera work done in that
Thank
video.
you very much. But it was interesting. If I remember it correctly, that wall of the grave markers, weren't they like they didn't know exactly where they belonged in the cemetery, and they didn't want to. They like displayed them because they didn't know exactly where to put them.
Yeah, there was no map to say where these gravestones belonged, and like in the video in the 1970s when they were refurbishing the cemetery, they found these tombstones that didn't know exactly where to place them. So it sits in an entire city block, which you saw when you were there with me, and so they put them all along this one wall. And that's just a small portion of what we showed in the video. And they're all very legible. Most of them are very legible. They've all been cleaned and kind of made the way you can read them. And to your point, we have a video later where it's a walkthrough of the cemetery. It is like a lot of open space between tombs and stuff.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We have a video. That video is one of the ones we have tonight as well.
Yeah, that one is what. Okay. It also includes some other footage of Bonaventure Cemetery, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, so it's beautiful to me. And I remember we went back over there because that cemetery is also famous for orbs and things at night, right? And even some sightings of some.
It is. When we went on the nighttime ghost tour, we heard a lot of stories about people seeing spirits that are dressed in like colonial garb, revolutionary time garb, walking through the cemetery. Unfortunately, we didn't see any when we were there.
But we went back and we tried. We wanted to spend some time there, but it is beautiful. And all Savannah has this sort of peaceful, historic. It's very walkable. There's just trees everywhere. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And if you're an American history nut, it's one of the great things about the cemeteries. There's a lot of recognizable names from like the original 13 colonies, which another video talks about later. But you kind of get a sense of like the very beginning of the United States, which is a cool place to be.
Yeah, Savannah was really important as a shipping port and bringing everything into the colonies. Yeah. And as someone who grew up in Georgia, we learned a lot about Savannah and Oglethorpe and all those very famous people that were there. And it's very cool to go to these cemeteries. As a someone who grew up in Georgia, I know all these names. Mm-hmm. Many of the cities around the state are named for these famous historical figures. And so you would see Roswell and you'd see, whatever, the lots of names. Very cool.
Yeah, and I never really considered that. I remember, I grew up in Missouri, so Missouri history was always a requirement. So I know all kinds of weird facts about Missouri in my head.
But were there cities in Missouri that were named for some of these? Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. And and the weird thing is, I grew up in Missouri, but I really didn't get into the exploring cemeteries thing until after I moved out of Missouri. So there's a lot of Missouri I haven't.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to say about Savannah is back when I was growing up in Georgia, we always had the all-state band thing every year, and the state convention was always in Savannah.
Perfect.
And so as a child who was in these ensembles, I would travel there, usually with my mom, sometimes with my parents, whatever, and spend a long weekend in Savannah. And while we were doing that, there would be breaks. My mother and I would go wander around cemeteries.
Yeah.
Like we just, that was something my mom and I did together. We thought it was really interesting to look at the history. What were the dates? Do we know any of the names? And so I was walking around cemeteries as a young kid.
Yeah, and
here I am today. I've come so far.
You've come full circle. And Kristen, to answer your question, she says, was it you guys telling me, or did I watch something on the History Channel that Savannah was practically built on top of the dead? And probably both. The History Channel has probably said that, and we learned that there as well. And actually, the cemetery that we were just showing was from what we learned, used to be larger than that city block, and they just kind of cut it off and just built from there. So there are some businesses that are probably built over some graves, which could explain a lot of the hauntings there as well. And when we did the Sorrel Weed House tour, we learned that there were like Revolutionary War soldiers that died like in that square and are probably buried there, and they just kind of kept on going. So yes, there's a lot of
part of that. I don't think was necessarily them blatantly trying not to be respectful. I think it was just a matter of the resources. The space was very small. The rest of it was wilderness and swamp and Native Americans and danger and all kinds of stuff. And so they didn't have a lot of space to work with at the beginning. It's
not like you had the funeral home up the street that could take you to the cemetery down the road. It just wasn't that kind of world. So yeah, we heard that a lot, that there are a lot of places that are just built over either a site of a battle or a massacre, or when they built, they found some bodies and just said, okay, we'll leave them alone, but we're going to just keep on building. Yeah, creepy.
So what's another one of the videos that you like to show?
Oh, well, there's so many. Well, we talked a lot about the squares, and there's one house in particular that is a private residence now, so we did not go in, but it's on Abercorn. And it's said to be very haunted. And remember, it's a private residence now, so what we're saying is just things we've heard. We're not saying that the people there are experiencing hauntings, but it's a beautiful house, and there was lots of information about it to read up on. So
we're just sharing information that is well regarded about this place.
Absolutely. So check out this quick clip on Abercorn Drive.
Here in Savannah, there are 22 city squares, and I'm standing in Calhoun Square, and behind me is 432 Abercorn. This is allegedly one of the more haunted buildings here in Savannah. And the reason for it is because where it's located. The building itself was built in 1868, but what was here before then may have cursed not only that house, but this entire square that I'm in. It's believed that underneath this house was actually the burial spot for enslaved peoples. And rather than relocate those bodies, the new structure that's behind me was actually just built right on top of there. There are a lot of stories that talk about different suicides and murders in this building, which have been disproved. But it's also believed that in here, a lot of people have a feeling of heaviness and darkness. And they also say that if you take photos of this location, especially at night, you will catch shadowy figures in the windows. 432 Abercorn is, like I said, one of the most haunted locations in Savannah, and definitely a must-see when you come to visit.
And if that's a wonderful example of just how beautiful the mansions are, and you're on these squares, and of course the houses that were on the square are these huge mansions with very important, very wealthy people owned, and still to this day, that's a beautiful, beautiful building.
Yeah, it is, and they're very tall, and they're a lot bigger than what you expect. A lot of people will compare Savannah to New Orleans, and not to say that New Orleans doesn't have a lot of big buildings, but a lot of theirs are narrow and shotgun style. Where
Correct.
Here they're just huge mansions that are sitting right there on the street.
Yeah, so you stand in one of the squares, and there's usually a statue in the center, and wonderful trees, and a park, and places to sit, and then all around the road goes all around that little park area, and then there are homes and famous buildings all the way around. It's a really wonderful place. And it's very, as he mentioned, very walkable city. So it's a great place. Like you can have a nice meal and then go walk around the different squares and wander around. And it's very, very walkable.
And the food was fantastic. It was actually in Savannah where we came up with the idea for the potion wall behind us.
That's true. We ran across a hotel that had a wall like this. It's all
bourbon bottles.
All bourbon bottles. So it was all that same color, that sort of brownish, bronzy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, and it was beautiful, but they were all lit from underneath, and it was like a see-through wall, and we just thought it was really beautiful. So that was an inspiration for where we're sitting right now.
Yeah, and a lot of our travels have kind of inspired us for what we built for Phantom History House. So yeah, it makes me kind of a little nostalgic for that trip, and hopefully we'll be able to make it back and see more of the places. And we talked a lot about the Sorrel Weed House, and I actually did an interview with Audrey, who was our tour guide that day. We're not going to show a clip here tonight, but I did a podcast with her.
And you can find that on phantomhistory.com or on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, and we also did a Phantom History House calls with her as well, because they are constantly discovering more history about that building. And the stories that they had shared had changed slightly since we took our tour, because they found more artifacts that disproved one of their legends. So they constantly keep up to date on what's going on there. And such a cool tour, and we did it during the daytime.
And that's because of me, because I was like, it was kind of early in my wading into the spooky world, really. I mean, it was very new, and we're talking about early in 2022. We didn't even, before we even had gotten the house, right?
It was before we finalized.
So we were getting inspired and doing research or whatever. And so I was like, okay, I will take this ghost tour of this haunted mansion, but I am not going at night. Sorry. I know you really wanted to.
And Audrey did a great job with the tour. I mean, it was all inside, of course. They had a lot of these places, they do these ghost tours and historic tours, and your ticket money goes toward refurbishing the place. So last time we talked to her, they were almost done with the third floor, which was not complete when we were there. So there's even more you can go and see now.
Back. And one of the things I remember was you're walking through, they take you from room to room and they tell you the stories about things that might have happened in the room and people, how they lived, whatever. Well, I remember we were in one of the big drawing rooms and we're standing in there. Everybody's just sort of looking around and the lights like flickered.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And everybody looks at each other and then everybody looks at the tour guide.
Yeah.
And like, is this a normal thing? And then she was like, no.
She's like, this doesn't usually happen. Yeah. I mean, stuff happens, but not usually that.
It's your electric personality.
That must be it. Yeah. Well, she had some great stories too about her own experiences in the building and how she actually felt like the ghosts were her friends. And when she was there late at night by herself, she knew she wasn't alone, which made her feel more comfortable, which was a whole interesting take. And she's a ghost tour guide who's afraid of the dark, which I thought was interesting too.
Okay.
Yeah, but all that is.
She was very interesting, and she was wonderful. And you can find, like you said, it's the Sorrel Weed House, right?
Yes.
You can find the podcast about that, and also the house calls where we talked to her.
Yeah.
Well, so let's play another video, one of our little clips.
Yeah. So we, there's the city of Savannah, but outside of the city of Savannah is this beautiful cemetery called Bonaventure, and there is a very famous grave there that we wanted to make sure that we visited. It's probably one of the biggest legends in Savannah. And also the most visited grave in this beautiful cemetery that sits on a hillside overlooking a river.
Beautiful.
So check out our quick tour to visit the grave of Gracie.
This is a clip from our visit to Savannah in 2022. Put in your questions in the comments.
The grave of 6-year-old Gracie Watson is the most visited grave in Bonaventure Cemetery here in Savannah, Georgia. This is where the body of the 6-year-old is laid to rest. She died of pneumonia in the 1880s, just 2 days before Easter Sunday. Her father was grief-stricken and had her buried here. And then a few years later, when a well-renowned sculptor came into town, he asked that a likeness of his daughter be created and placed on her grave, which is why we have that detailed sculpture behind us of little Gracie, life-size, sitting there with her ankles crossed and with her hand on some ivy. There's a lot of symbolism in this piece of art as well. Of course, innocence cut short, as well as the ivy meaning everlasting life. Now, poor Gracie is said to be lonely in the fact that there is no other family of hers here. When her parents finally moved back up to New England, they were laid to rest there when they passed away. However, Gracie is not lonely in the afterlife because she's the most visited grave here in Bonaventure Cemetery. The reason that there is a gate around this location is because a lot of people would come in, wish her well, leave her gifts, and then rub her nose for luck. The cemetery actually did some surgery on that nose, replaced the statue, at least that part of the statue, and put up this fence so that she could actually be in rest from here until perpetuity. Now, there is a ghost story attached to this as well. It's believed that young Gracie is seen throughout downtown Savannah, mostly where the Pulaski Hotel used to stand, because that's where her father actually managed the hotel and where she was seen by guests, often playing. I've read a few reports of her actually being seen in the cemetery as well, but when she is spotted, she is seen in a white dress, laughing, dancing, singing, and running, much like any 6-year-old girl would do. Rest in peace, Gracie.
I really enjoyed our time in the cemetery that day. I mean, it's expansive, and there's different sections to it, and just long rows of beautiful monuments, and it was fun trying to find Gracie's grave.
It's the first cemetery I've ever been to that has its own app. Like when we got there, you can scan a QR code and get an app on your phone, and it kind of helps you figure out where you are because it's that big.
Which is helpful. Yeah, it is really big.
Yeah, and it's very well maintained, and it's very beautiful. And, a lot of really old graves there too, which we always like. Yeah, and there were a lot of people there too walking around. Right,
and there were a lot of people that were clearly wanting to make sure they found Gracie's grave and see it and take pictures and pay their respects and that kind of thing. So it was nice.
Yeah, and I love visiting old cemeteries. Obviously a lot of people do, but it saddens me a little that they had to put up that fence to protect that statue because people can't keep their hands to themselves. Rub her nose for good luck, and eventually it's going to fall off, and they had to fix it. So if you do visit these amazing old graves, look, take pictures, take videos, but please be respectful. Try not to touch anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no matter where you are, especially in New Orleans, because then a curse will follow you home. But that's a whole different story. So they say. Yeah, but we spent like a whole day at that cemetery.
We did spend a lot of time there, but I mean, I just had a wonderful trip. We're talking about our trip to Savannah, of course, a couple years ago, and we're hoping to go back again very soon. And really, I loved how calm and peaceful the city was. I remember one of the first places we went was to the main square with the famous fountain.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Oglethorpe or Fontaine?
Fontaine was the name of the fountain.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, very famous park with this beautiful fountain, and we did a little bit of filming there and things, which I thought was beautiful. But it's sort of like there are parts of Central Park or other places where there's just these giant old hundreds of year old trees.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. And there's a vibe, a historical and comfortable, relaxing vibe to it.
Well, it's so protected. I remember driving down the street to get there, and then suddenly this expansive park opens up in front of you, and there's people having picnics. There was like a birthday party going on. There were tourists, there were dogs, there were kids. I mean, there was everything and everybody doing things on this beautiful summer day that we were there.
Which all great cities should have parks like that.
Yeah, there was a lot of shared space. I was shocked at how expansive it was. So to your point, it was huge.
And you did mention food earlier. We had some great food. Of course, you're on the sea coast, and there's of course all the great seafood and everything. And there's a waterfront area too that's sort of famous with lots of shops, and we really enjoyed wandering around there as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ghost stories tied there too. You talked a little bit about the pirate legend. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I do know that there's a seafood restaurant that is allegedly haunted by a pirate. And there's a lot. We sat there for a while, and watched these massive ships come in and out, cargo vessels and stuff. So it was just a really cool place to visit. So if you're looking for somewhere to go this spring and summer, definitely put it on the list.
Yeah, at least a weekend, if not a long weekend or whatever. But we really enjoyed that. We were going to see my family in Atlanta, and then we just went by Savannah on the way home. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, kind of took our time, which was really cool.
So we're showing some clips that we recorded while we were there of you talking about historic stuff.
Yeah, I was definitely in my element, and that's one great thing about how this all works. Tim is very supportive of going to all these historic spots and doing great camera work. So thank you for that. And we stopped by an old inn, actually called the Foley House Inn, which is, I believe it still is working as kind of like not quite a bed and breakfast, but something similar to that. And it's been around for a really, really long time. And of course has this really cool story about an accidental murder that happened inside the building that there's still proof of in this building, they say, and of course there's a haunting connected to it as well. So this was a fun one to see for our own eyes, not the haunting, but the actual building.
Right.
Check out the Foley House Inn.
In 1896, the Foley House Inn opened its doors under the ownership of Honoria Foley, who actually ran it as a, not quite a bed and breakfast, but more like a overnight stay for people who were in town for a short period of time or who were maybe transitioning onto a new life to move on to a new world here in Savannah or beyond. Well, Honoria Foley had a very successful business in this location, and it was actually the place to come and stay as you were passing through Savannah. However, there's a story that happened at the height of her business that could tie into the local ghost story that is legend here now. Honoria actually stayed in the room that has the very nice window on the second floor above me. And legend has it that one night while she was sleeping, she awoke suddenly and saw a man in her room. Panicked, she took a candlestick or some kind of blunt object and struck him on the head for protection, accidentally killing him. The only reason we know this is true, according to a tour that we took, is because she mentions it very briefly in her own personal diary. In the 1980s, if you fast forward quite a bit, the Foley House Inn is being refurbished and prepared for another life as a bed and breakfast, and they actually broke through a wall to connect the original structure to the structures next door to take up more space and to have room for more guests. During that construction, there was actually some bones found in a little cubby in the wall. It's guessed that those are the remains of the young man that Mrs. Foley allegedly killed to protect herself. Now, there are actually stories about a ghost of a man seen walking through this building. Some say he has a top hat, some say he interacts with guests and is very rude, and others say that they just see an apparition either in the hallways or in the different rooms here in the Foley House Inn. And as you can expect, the most haunted room in this location is where Miss Foley herself used to sleep and where she used to call home, on that second floor with that incredibly ornate window. Now, it's said that Miss Foley herself didn't put the body of this young man into the wall. She used the help of her son, who used some ballast stones to recover the wall and then plaster over it where the remains sat for more than 80 years. That's why the Foley House Inn is considered one of the top destinations for ghost tours here in Savannah, Georgia.
I love that story.
Yeah, it's really cool. And what you can hear in the background is you hear things going by because we're on the street. We're in one of those squares. But that was one of the things I loved about Savannah, was that there were all these interesting ways that people were having parties and celebrating. There was those things where people sit on either side of like this wagon and they're pedaling as they're having their libations and celebrating. And I don't know how they pedal when they're drunk, but anyway, it seemed to be working.
Well, see, you burn through the alcohol, so you stay sober enough, but you're not steering, your bartender is steering, so you don't have to worry about the actual driving part.
And there was also like a hearse that had been turned into like a party bus, and there were people sticking out the top of it, and like that was interesting. So it's like there's a lot of fun stuff going on all around you when you're there, and it's different from New Orleans. It's not as sort of freewheeling and spooky. It's a little bit more colonial townish to me.
It is. I mean, I think if you go down to the waterfront to like the historic party district, it's probably a little bit crazier. But yeah, this is kind of like more on the outskirts of New Orleans. It's more neighborhood vibe feel. I think it's, no offense to our friends in New Orleans, I think it's a cleaner city. At least this area is, and there's more room. Like it doesn't feel like it's all on top of each other. So there's a lot of places to roam through. And like we said, there's 22 squares, I think we said. And most of those squares have a place or a placard that talks about history and or somebody who is buried there. So even the squares themselves are kind of like grave markers.
Yeah, very famous names and things. If you have any questions for us, we're almost done with this little presentation about Savannah tonight. But if you have any questions, please type them in. And we have one more video to share.
We do have one more video to share. Now, we talked about both of these cemeteries. We talked about the Colonial Cemetery. We also talked about Bonaventure Cemetery. But there's a little bit more to share about the first cemetery, which you'll hear in this clip. And the rest just kind of like some vistas and some views of what we're looking at when you walk through some of these places to kind of give you a quick feel of what it's like being in the cemeteries of Savannah, Georgia.
Colonial Park Cemetery in Savannah is probably the oldest active cemetery in the United States. Well, I shouldn't say active. It's no longer accepting burials. It was closed in 1853 after 103 years of operation. But one of the many cool facets of this location is the historic names that you see. You see Gwinnett, you see Johnson, you see Bullock, you see Haversham. All of these are names that are directly associated with the founding of Georgia, and they're also actually involved in the formation of the original 13 colonies. So you're actually walking on American history as you walk through this cemetery, and there are so many markers, not only on the gravestones themselves, but historical markers that talk about who these people were, what they did to contribute to society, and why they are such an important part of Georgia history. You could spend hours in this cemetery because it's so big, and it covers an entire city block, but it actually goes out further. But they had to actually cut it off because they actually built around it. So there are bodies, actually the businesses around here as well.
So beautiful. I love walking through these beautiful cemeteries, seeing the monuments and everything. Listen, everybody, we are going to be doing a lot more of this now in the coming months and years. So watch, of course, on social media, on our website at phantomhistory.com, and on the YouTube channel. And we'll be posting all kinds of information where we're going to be going places and doing these live interviews just like these.
Yeah, we're going to start doing some traveling. We're also going to include some videos with people hopefully on site who are going to be sharing their stories and their experiences as well. So it's a transitional year for us, and we're looking forward to that. But the original podcast is still going to keep going, Phantom History. There is a new episode coming out this week where I talk to two women who make up the Witches Familiar Paranormal Research Team, who investigated the Mineral Hotel in Alton, Illinois, near my hometown of St. Louis. And they're going to join us next week on Phantom History House Calls to talk about haunted objects.
That's going to be cool. Our objects themselves actually haunted. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Yep.
Watch for more videos like these and us on location. I'm excited to be going to more places, and I'm sure we'll be back in Savannah soon.
Yeah, please stay in touch on social media. We're always on Instagram and on Facebook and now on Blue Sky. So, and on TikTok, as long as that sticks around. So give us a follow and stay in touch with us, and we will see you guys again next week.
Yeah, hope you'll come visit Phantom History House. And there's still some nights available.
Absolutely.
Hope to see you.
Bye,
Thanks, everybody, for watching.